Listening Fanfiction presents Always My Soulmate by Watermelon's Melon Felon, based on the anime series Yuri on Ice, narrated for you by Sierra Feast. Chapter 1, Soul Script. It's a most unfortunate happenstance, Yuri thought as he stared at his hand. Never before had he considered that his soulmate was not Japanese. After all, the words written on his flesh were in perfect Japanese, so it was only logical to assume. However, Yuri could honestly say that he was not happy with who his soulmate was. There he was, a 23-year-old figure skater who'd finally heard his soulmate speak to him for the first time, and the horrible thing was that his soulmate was a person that Yuri greatly admired and knew that he could never have. Certainly, lines were never meant to cross. While the soulmate marks meant that that person was literally perfect for you in every way, not everyone met their soulmates or ended up liking their soulmates. Victor Nikiforov was not truly meant for Katsuki Yuri, and it was that simple. Yuri could tell the man was a star, one of the very best skaters in the world, breaking record after record and wowing the audiences easily. He didn't have time to consider a chubby soulmate like Yuri, and Yuri didn't plan on saying anything. Besides, his soulmate had just mistaken him for a fan. And yes, Yuri was actually a longtime fan, but it was more of an insult because it had been the very same competition as Victor. He'd placed last because he'd succumbed to anxiety mid-skeet and failed spectacularly, but he had still been a competitor. He was considered Japan's top figure skater after all, but it seemed that Victor did not view him as worthwhile competition, or even recognize others in the competition, which was a bit of a disappointment. When Victor's mouth formed the words that Yuri had always longed to hear, the Japanese young man was not a flutter. He was not amazed or grateful. There was nothing of that fluttering in his stomach at the revelation of his soulmate. Nothing but disappointment, and the young Russian Yuri's words ringing through his head. Turning away from the plain smile on his idol's face, Yuri passed Moruka Hisashi, sharing a tight smile at the man's supportive look, and left. It seemed he was finished. His parents and sister were supportive of his return trip home. Minako-sensei had bombarded him at the airport with words of pride and inspiration. She then forced him to greet every one of his fans, despite how harrowed it made him feel. Even though he'd ended up falling and ruining his routine so terribly, there were people who still looked up to him and admired him. He didn't deserve their kind words. Yuri wasn't as good as they all thought he was. To any person properly acquainted with skating, they'd know that his technique was sloppy and that he lacked confidence. Both affected our performance. It's the duty of the performer to make it look effortless, but just because it looked that way didn't mean it was. Yuri was flustered, almost unbearably so, by the time he'd made it home. Minako-sensei grinned proudly as she pushed him inside the building and announced his arrival to all those within. Yuri greeted his mother immediately, and then went to speak with V-chan. It had been a long time. At least he was home, where comfort could drown out his disappointment. Victor Nikiforov was intrigued immediately when several close acquaintances sent him links that all led to the same video. A video uploaded to YouTube just that morning, which had been refined considerably with amazing editing skills and a catchy title. His own name was in the title, which would garner enough attention, but another skater's name was in the title as well. Victor recognized the face immediately, and was a little put out at having not realized that the same boy he'd assumed was a fan was actually a figure skater from Japan who had finished last in the Grand Prix. Foolishness on his part. Opening a new window, he typed in the name Katsuki Yuri, and found himself bombarded with Japanese praises and accolades for the young man who was not a child and was actually 4 years Victor's junior. Assaulted his eyes. Katsuki Yuri was a record holder in Japan, known for his prowess in peculiar footwork and unique spin sequences. He was also considered the top figure skater by the JSF. Noted comments included things like, the figure skater with the world's biggest glass heart, and the heir to the lungs of a dying man. With interest piqued, Victor turned back to the video. Pressing play, Victor settled himself in for several minutes of nail-biting and mild panic, but then they didn't happen. Nothing of the sort had to happen. Katsuki Yuri assumed the perfect position and simply flowed. Victor watched closely, the steps perfect, the spins on point, and even the jumps executed with a precision that he had not expected. Honestly, he felt foolish once again. Yuri was good enough to make it to the Grand Prix, so he obviously had skill. Victor couldn't help but feel that Yuri brought the emotion of the performance to the forefront more than Victor ever could. When it was over, he pressed play once again and watched even more closely, this time with the screen enlarged. And when his mobile died, he turned to his laptop, using that to immerse himself in the stunning delight that was Katsuki Yuri. And Victor was suddenly filled with an idea. Yuri spluttered at the sight of Viktor Nikiforov, naked in his family's onsen and smiling at him as if this was a natural occurrence and he shouldn't be surprised. The reaction Yuri had was to scream, hide his face in his hands, and then flee at top speed to his bedroom. A bit disappointed in the man, and still conflicted over the whole soulmate revelation, Yuri was unsure of what to do. And if he spoke to Victor, then would Victor know that Yuri was his soulmate, and what would happen next? And if he spoke to Victor, then would Victor know that Yuri was his soulmate, and what would happen then? Yes, the man exclaimed very proudly that he would be helping Yuri make it to the Grand Prix finals this year. But what would this sudden revelation do? Yuri grasped at his hair, feeling the anxiety mounting. He wasn't ready for this. Home was supposed to be for calm, where he'd go and skate for hours at a time, reflecting on his mistakes and trying to rectify them, where he could be himself, and now this was happening. Yuri resolved, to the best of his ability, to say nothing aloud to Victor. That had to be the best course of action. Yuri's mother just proven that she was as brilliant as he always believed her to be. She'd managed to work her charm on Victor and had him fed and resting by the time Yuri had felt brave enough to venture from his room, where he'd removed all of his prized Victor posters and slipped them into a folder that then made its way between his mattress and the box spring. He would take no chances. The Russian skater was napping on the floor when Yuri found him. Mari was sitting at the table and Minako-sensei was smiling around her third bottle of sake. "He came here for you. He told us. You inspired him," she said fondly. Yuri flushed and knelt down in order to be closer to the two women. Leaning over the table, he held out his palm to show them the writing of his soulmate's words. He then gave a very telling point to Victor and a frown for good measure. Mari's jaw dropped and Minako-sensei squealed just a bit. "Have you said anything yet?" Yuri shook his head. "What if it ruins whatever might happen? I can't handle this right now." Mari's cigarette twitched a bit as she stood, and Yuri watched in confusion as she walked over to Victor's sleeping form in order to turn his hands over. She nodded and came back. "It's nothing that probably hasn't been said to him before." Yuri gaped at the audacity and sputtered when Minako-sensei asked what it was. The two women leaned closer together to whisper excitedly, leaving Yuri to flounder in embarrassment. Nothing that probably hasn't been said to him before meant that it was a common phrase. A phrase that could be disguised, perhaps? Moments later, entry of Utopia, Akatsuki, sliding down one pale shoulder. Yuri turned away, flustered at seeing his soulmate's body without permission. Victor mumbled something about hunger and looked over his shoulder, seeing Yuri kneeling at the table. His blue eyes brightened immediately, and he turned swiftly. "Hello again, Yuri. You left before we could properly introduce ourselves." Yuri lifted a single hand to wave, not trusting his voice. He couldn't even bear looking at the other man. How was he supposed to speak to him? Yuri's mother returned suddenly, holding a bowl of katsudon. Yuri's mouth watered, wishing that was for him. He wanted some, but he was gaining weight too quickly and couldn't afford to eat whatever he wanted at the moment. "Here you are, Victor," the woman said, placing the bowl at the table. "It's Yuri-kun's favorite dish." "Thank you!" The Russian man beamed, pushing himself over to the table and smiling down at Yuri. "Is it particularly delicious?" Yuri nodded. "He pays out on them," said Mari with a smirk. Yuri sent a glare her way, and she merely shrugged. "So, Victor-kun," Minako-sensei began, leaning across the table. "Have you met your soulmate yet?" Yuri wanted to die. "No finesse!" Victor's mouth turned down a little. No, I'm not giving up hope yet. Have any of you met your soulmates? Minago and Mari both shook their heads, though Yuri found himself nodding before he could stop himself. Victor's gaze was alight with curiosity. You have? He exploded, pushing the bowl of food aside in order to face Yuri fully. Was it all inspiring and amazing and breathtaking like everyone says it was? Not really. The response came from Yuri, Minako, and Mari at the same time, and Yuri looked to them in confusion, only to see Mari make a light gesture to Victor's hand. His soulmate's soul mark simply said, not really. How embarrassing. Chancing a peek at Victor, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. The man didn't even look shocked. It's nothing that probably hasn't been said to him before. Victor must have heard that phrase many times and found out that none of the people who said it were his soulmate. Poor Victor. Victor was ruthless to Yuri, at least in training. Yuri wasn't fat or even obese in any way. He was a little over 5.5 feet in height and was well proportioned everywhere. However, for figure skating, he was about 20 pounds over the required weight limit. He knew that the younger man was teased over it, but it wasn't something too noticeable, mostly in the face, actually. Yuri suffered a hormonal imbalance coupled with generalized anxiety and depression. He had a habit of eating the nearest thing in order to calm himself, else he'd have a panic attack, or so his mother told Victor. Victor was working him out of the habit of eating the nearest thing by supplementing sugar-free gum. Having a part of his body moving constantly would also help take away the consistent leg tapping. He could stem with chewing something that wouldn't affect his health or weight that way, and it would make his weight loss attempt easier. It would also help him perform better if he wasn't randomly reaching down to tap at his leg when he got nervous. He found Yuri to be adorable, his little habits and likes and dislikes, even the roundness to his face when they met. Victor had forbidden him from skating until he'd lost the proper amount of weight. 30 pounds, just to be safe. A little leeway in case he gained on accident. He never thought that someone could lose 30 pounds in a month, but Yuri pulled it off somehow, his exercising more advanced than anything Victor did. He had stamina, a lot of it. Victor was impressed because on a 5K run, Yuri had kept a steady pace the entire 14 minutes they had run. And Victor died about halfway through when he tried keeping up with the even pacing. The reason Yuri was so stamina strong was because he practiced both ballet and ice skating on the regular, having been a ballerino before becoming an ice skater, and had built up endurance. Victor's jumps were better than his spins and footwork, to be honest. His stamina wasn't as good as Yuri's, which had surprised him. Yuri Plizetsky had many unpleasant things to say about the Japanese Yuri over the years. One comment had been about his weight and how impossible it must have been for him to do anything with all his weight holding him down. Victor hadn't known who he had been talking about at the time, but now that he knew, he had to admit that Yuri's observation was incredibly childish. Though Yuri was actually a child, but still. Maybe to younger people, Yuri was fat, but in Victor's eyes, he was a perfectly normal size for a regular civilian. He still fit in his clothes easily, clothes he'd had for years, according to his mother. His body honestly hadn't changed much. Yuri was simply too self-conscious and probably had light body dysphoria. Victor would be sure to deal with that, too. His Yuri needed self-confidence in the worst of ways. And as he'd just reached the ideal weight mark Victor had set for him, they could begin the true training. And maybe less 5-kilometer races. Yuri truly wasn't bothered by the appearance of Yuri Plizetsky. Not really. The boy was simply a child with a big mouth and an arrogant amount of confidence. Such that made him a bit of a loner because he was annoying to other people. Yes, Yuri was offended by the things he said. He couldn't help himself, but he wasn't particularly scared of the teen. He was scared of what could happen, though. Yuri was a skilled skater and already had a relationship with Victor. So in his desire to take Victor back to Russia in order for Victor to fulfill his promise to him, they had both been dragged into a competition. Said competition that had been set up by Yuri's friend Yuko's triplet daughters, the ones that leaked a video of him dancing Victor's routine. And Yuri was very much aware of how skilled Yuri was as a skater. A brat maybe, but a skilled brat. So if Yuri didn't learn how to control himself and how to properly translate Victor's program, then he would be saying goodbye to his idol, and found that he didn't want to. Something about Victor was infectious. He was eager to explore Japan and wanted to know about everything going on in Hasetsu and relied on Yuri to show him everything. Yuri hadn't been forced to socialize on such a massive scale in years. But it was fun, surprisingly. Photos constantly being taken and eating various foods that Yuri happily introduced Victor to. The man had maxed out his Instagram account with never-ending photographs of anything and everything, especially Yuri. He liked to tease Yuri in many ways, over support during training, when they exercised, when they walked anywhere, when they took photos. Especially when taking photos. Victor was a particularly touchy person and he liked physical contact, something Yuri wasn't used to. Yet it didn't feel so awkward with Victor. Was it because they were soulmates or something else? Did soulmates feel drawn to each other the way Yuri felt drawn to Victor? Yuri! Take a photo with me and the statue! With a sigh, the younger man nodded and allowed Victor to pull him into a tight and warm embrace in front of the simple statue of a fish. Victor was such a child at times, finding pleasure in the simplest of things. Yuri thought it was sweet. Eros. In Greek mythology, there were 6 types of love, and Eros was the sexual aspect, the passionate side of love that involved being in touch with one's inner sensuality. Yuri had accidentally said that Katsudan would be his inspiration when trying to bring Victor's story to life in his own performance, but that wasn't right exactly. Victor's story held a predatory sort of elegance that Yuri knew he could never imitate. Yuri was soft and sweet with a heart of glass. He couldn't be the Casanova wooing the ladies, even if he tried. Nothing about him was abrasive or overly arrogant in the least. He also wasn't comfortable trying to take on such a personality. It wasn't him, and it would look too forced and stiff if he kept trying. There was something more on the line than just having Victor as a coach. Victor himself was on the line, so he needed a different approach, one that Minako-sensei had agreed to help him with. Yuri showed her the routine, particularly his footwork and gestures, allowing her to modify his movements until they fit his desired story. Not the stunning Casanova, capable of charming any woman in his path. Instead, he was the beautiful temptress, a type of character that seemed so much more easier to him. While everyone was under the impression that he was working to seduce a bowl of pork, he was actually working to seduce his soulmate, Victor. Yuri! Victor threw his arms out, catching the young man who was skating with excitement after performing one of the most beautiful programs Victor had ever seen. Though his jumps weren't perfect, and his nerves had been obvious a few times, but it had tugged on something inside Victor, and he adored it more than anything he'd seen in years. In a way, Yuri had been skating for him, and the thought made him flush. His Yuri was special and had made him proud. Of course, they would have to work on perfecting it, which he didn't hesitate to tell Yuri. But what mattered was how proud Victor was. All the while, Yuri's grin never died away, and Victor found himself possessive over it. He was also incredibly pleased to see the speculation from the media over the very close placement of his hand on Yuri's arm. Forget his soulmate. Yuri was obviously perfect for him, and if Yuri's soulmate wasn't as amazing as he had hoped, then maybe they could be one of those couples that didn't conform to the soulmate beliefs. As he watched Yuri's flesh deepen over the newest article about their possible relationship, Victor decided that he would much prefer a future with Yuri instead. Yuri had gotten used to Victor's touching by now. 3 months of what he would tentatively call a friendship had led to Victor being very cheerful and physical on a near constant basis. The man was so happy to be around Yuri that Yuri couldn't understand it. "Photo?" Victor asked, holding up his mobile and fluttering his lashes furiously. Smiling, Yuri relented and allowed himself to be dragged into Victor's embrace, where the older man rubbed something smooth and cherry-scented over Yuri's lips. This move had become a usual thing. Victor seemed to have an interest in mouths, having touched Yuri's lips often for whatever reason when he felt like getting closer. He didn't get as flustered over it now, but it was still an incredibly intimate thing to do. Sometimes he wondered if Victor knew how many social stigmas he created on a constant basis. Thankfully, they weren't conducted in the presence of the general public, so it was okay most of the time. "Which side is your best?" Victor asked as he pulled up the camera. "My left," he answered without giving himself a second to think about it. Victor moved the mobile into his other hand, making sure the front camera was facing them. Samu! Confused, Yuri mimicked him, only to find his mouth suddenly occupied by Victor's own and the shutter on the camera clicking away repeatedly. When Victor pulled back slightly, he murmured almost too low to hear, Sol's Hyomoyo. And Victor leaned in again. After a few moments of suggestive kissing and perhaps a little over-enthusiasm on Victor's part, the two parted. Yuri looked deliciously ruffled, and Victor immensely proud that he hadn't been turned away. I was hoping we could take this to another level. What about your soulmate? Victor's smile, running a hand on Yuri's face. I don't need a soulmate when I have you. Yuri's brown eyes sparkled for a moment, and he smiled brightly, almost blessing Victor in a sense. The young man gripped Victor's hand and turned it over, revealing the Japanese words that Victor had long ago lost hope in. Raising his own hand, Yuri revealed his own soul mark. He reached, placing said hand over Victor's heart, while pulling at Victor's hand until it was placed directly over Yuri's heart. You have us. Or should I say, me? And within seconds to the realization, Victor threw his arms around Yuri and buried his face in that messy dark hair, happily inhaling a scent that had soothed him many times since coming to Japan. And his heart soared when Yuri responded in kind, wrapping warm arms around his soulmate and running a hand down the back of his head. This was good, better than good. It was perfect. It was right. Show me the photos you took, Yuri said suddenly. I don't want you posting all of them. Some might look terrible. Nuzzling the man's hair and messing it up even further, Victor couldn't help but say, You could never look terrible. Yuri sighed and melted against him, allowing his soulmate to fuss over him. Neither could you, Victor. The grin that appeared was wide enough to hurt,